We anticipate those initial trainings to be available to the membership as we start next year in 23-24. So I will go to the next slide and actually turn it over to my colleague, Bill Regan.
Thanks, Louise, and good afternoon, everybody. And just to continue on, I want to talk about the Division III Advisory Group, the council rather. This group has been a group that was initially formed to support the work of the team that was helping to develop the new NCAA Constitution. As a result of the new Constitution, there was a number of things that had to be implemented and developed. The President's Council asked this group to stay together to help support the councils and the committees to implement the required work that resulted from the new Constitution, as well as to work on issues that were identified by the membership through membership surveys. The council at this last meeting noted how successful this group has been in executing all of its work and helping the councils execute that work. And it also noted that much of the initial work that was prescribed for this group, it will be accomplished or has been accomplished or will be accomplished when it comes to the 2023 convention. Knowing that much of this work has been accomplished, the President's Council really just thanked the group for its efforts and determined that the group should sunset in conjunction with the 23 convention. So as of the 23 convention, this group will no longer meet as much as the work that is remaining has already been identified and is already being worked on within the current governance structure. Our Championships Committee, just want to provide you a couple quick updates. There's some change formats that were made for women's volleyball. First, conduct regional competition on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday format. And this is effective for the 22 national championships. And really, this was intended to create consistency and equity for teams advancing to the final sites. Also, there will be an adjustment to the championship date format to create a week between the regional and championships. That will be effective for next year's championship. This is also intended to provide a less compressed playing experience for our student athletes. Most of these initiatives were considered and were adopted by the Championships Committee really to enhance the experience for those student athletes competing in the volleyball championship. In addition to the recommended format changes for women's volleyball, the council also approved an administrative regulation to amend the championship selection criteria for rowing. What that will do is it will no longer include winning percentage, but will focus more on head-to-head results and results against common components. There was a realization that the winning percentage was not very applicable in terms of selection criteria, and the other criteria were more applicable in the sport of women, in the sport of rowing. The council has also sponsored a convention proposal for the 24 convention that would change the minimum sports sponsorship in tennis from 6 to 4. That switch would coincide with the changes to the ITA rules or the playing rules for tennis. The minimum participants needed to complete a contest based on ITA rules is now 4. The council also approved a recommendation for the Subcommittee for Legislative Relief to amend the directive that dealt with post-grad students. As you know, the current rules permit only a graduate from a Division III institution to compete at another Division III institution. However, there's been a waiver directive that's been in place for a number of years that would allow, under certain criteria are met, would allow student athletes from non-Division III institutions to be eligible to compete at a Division III institution as a graduate or post-grad student. One of those criteria has been that the student athlete need to have a minimum of 3.0 cumulative grade point average. After considering the request from the Subcommittee for Legislative Relief, the councils, both the Management Council recommended President's Council, which was adopted by President's Council, moved to eliminate the 3.0 requirement. Discussions around that really revolved around, is 3.0 really the adequate measure for academic success? When institutions use a number of different factors, especially within their enrollment of graduate students. So the idea would be now to default to the institution to determine who's an academically ready and prepared student. So effective immediately, the 3.0 requirement is no longer needed for a student athlete to fulfill that waiver directive. Management Council also adopted, rather approved several non-controversial legislative actions. The first was to exempt one contest per year against the U.S. national team or international equivalent during the team traditional segment. The second is to align when the football spring period must be completed to the same time frame in which other sports must complete their non-traditional seasons, which is 5 weekdays before the first day of the institution's final examination period. Another non-controversial proposal that was adopted was the elimination of the attestation of compliance for presidents and chancellors as well as athletic directors. This will be effective for 2023-24. And finally, the final non-controversial proposal to be approved by Management Council was to establish roll call voting as the default voting option for convention. It has been the voting option that has been used for quite some time. And rather than having to have the councils act on it, the idea is just to make that the legislative default. And the final slide is just a quick overview of the 23 convention schedule, just some highlights. Remember, it's in San Antonio beginning January 11th. Some key in-person programming include the honor celebration on Wednesday. Thursday will be the association-wide educational sessions, Special Olympics, Women of the Year luncheon, State of College Sports. The delegates reception, January 13th, is the issues forum. It's really important that all of you have the opportunity to attend this year's issues forum, as there's a lot of important updates relative to the legislation that will occur at this particular issues forum. Yeah, of course, there'll be conference meetings, Saluting Excellence Luncheon, and the LGBTQ of the Year Award celebration. And finally will be our business session on Saturday, January 14th.
Okay. It's Jeff Myers with Academic and Membership Affairs. And for most of you out there, you are entering championship season. And this is my legislative season. So I think there's 2 takeaways from that. First, your lives are infinitely more exciting than mine. And 2, this is just the start of a lot of materials that you're going to get from us and from AMA regarding kind of what these proposals are going to do that you'll vote for in January, and the process that we're going to go through with it. So this is just going to be a trailer. We're going to go through the proposals that are going to be considered in January at a very high level. We'll have an opportunity again on December 6th to go through these in a lot more detail. And I think that's going to be important because a lot of these proposals really got to go back to the beginning of this year. We passed the Constitution, and then we started to take a look at what Division III is going to be about, or what Division III should be about. And Louise already talked a little bit about the philosophy statement review. Some of these proposals came out of a review that followed that Constitution and what Division III should be about, not only on the governance side, but proposals submitted by the membership as well. And so I just want to go through those briefly, kind of give you an update of some of the education materials you'll receive over the next several weeks, and then also the process. So just from a time frame perspective, on November 15th, the official notice will go out, and that document will essentially identify all the proposals that you'll be considering in January. We hope to have some educational materials prior to that date that better define some of these proposals, and we'll talk about which ones those are. Following the official notice, we'll have a question and answer document that's prepared by the Division III Interpretations and Legislation Committee that gives sort of application answers to these proposals as well. And again, we'll look at what other materials will help overall in sort of this process of review. So if you take a look at this slide, these are the governance proposals that are being proposed for the January convention. And I think it's important to look at those first 2 bullets, because if you have been sort of pay attention to some of the proposals that have been discussed previously, there was one proposal that came from the governance structure that would have changed the management and president's council composition, as well as the composition of 6 standing committees. That was one entire proposal that has now been split by president's council. So we'll have 2 separate proposals, one that would amend the composition of president's and management council, and a separate proposal that would address these 6 standing committees. Briefly, from the council proposal position, it would account and allow for each conference to have representation on at least one of the councils at the same time. And it would also increase certain geographic representation, as well as representation for conference commissioners and faculty athletic representatives as well. The committee composition proposal standardizes the 6 committees, and they are the Championships Committee, the Nominating Committee, the Financial Aid Committee, Interpretations and Legislation Committee, Strategic Planning and Finance Committee, and I always get to one last one and don't have it written down here right in front of me. Louise, jump in and save me.
Oh, Jeff, if I could save you. So,
That's all right. So the
membership, I'm not sure you
Membership
said.
Committee. Thank you, Louise. I knew I could count on Louise. And so those 6 committees essentially bring some standardization to geographic representation and some of those other groups we mentioned as well. The proposal that we always seem to get loud cheers about is the 3rd bullet that you see on the slide there, and that would eliminate the requirement to submit the institutional self-study guide or the conference self-study guide. And so those guides would still exist. They would still be a resource tool for your institutions and your conferences. They would still be used within the new membership process, but as a requirement for active members, that would be eliminated. The next one has to do with the new membership process, and that would essentially say for an institution wanting to become a member of Division III. So either a reclassifying member, they're either a member of Division I or II, an NAIA member, or some other organization. If they were trying to enter the Division III membership process, they would have to have an invitation from a Division III conference in order to be a part of that process. The next one, and this did come out of the review post the Constitution, this would give the Student Athlete Advisory Committee a vote at convention. So that committee essentially would have 1 vote for every vote taken at the annual convention. Division II has had this in place for a few years. These student athletes discuss this, believe it's appropriate for Division III as well, and this will be voted on in January. The next one would establish a new playing and practice season structure. This has been discussed for many years. Much consensus regarding the need to change in this place. Very little consensus on what that change would be. And we're going to see this on the membership side as well. There's also a proposal from the membership that would essentially eliminate the current structure of the playing seasons and establish a different one. So 2 competing proposals. And again, going back to the importance as we get closer to the January convention to be aware of the educational materials that come out that really define the differences between these competing proposals. The next one there, the second to last one, is use of social media in recruiting. Right now, you can use social media in recruiting. This just gives a broader window of when you can have public communications with prospective student athletes via social media. And then the final one coming from the governance structure is recognizing stunt as an emerging sport for women. Now the membership side. And so these are the proposals that satisfy the sponsorship requirements and deadlines for the membership process. And the first one has to do with the nominating committee. It would increase the nominating committee from 8 members to 10. And it would take 10 members from regions that would be modeled after the current 10-region sport model. So important here, There's the governance proposal that addresses 6 standing committees, which also includes the nominating committee. Both of those would increase the nominating committee to 10, but where those individuals come from, that would be the difference. And again, this is one area where we'll go into a little bit more detail in educational materials coming out of our office and on that December 6th webinar to understand the differences between this membership proposal and the governance proposal. Similar with this next one, conference-based representation on Presidents and Management Council. This would also change the representation of the councils. It would require all conferences to be represented, similar to the governance model. But again, there'll be some nuances and the differences between this model, this proposal, and the governance proposal. And there will be, again, educational materials coming out sort of better defining those differences. A proposal that would address preseason acclimatization for fall sports. So it would effectively implement a required acclimatization period for all fall sports, and would change how the first permissible practice date is started, how the first permissible practice date is allowed for fall sports. Right now, there's a formula of counting units. This would be a strict 18 days before your first actual contest. And then we get into the playing and practice season proposal. This one would establish a playing and practice season of 114 days. The governance model would eliminate weeks, but have a little bit different structure for fall and spring than it would for winter. And so several differences there between the governance model and the membership proposed model. And again, referring to our educational materials that'll be coming out will be helpful in deciding essentially which proposal you all like better. And then the last one is a mental health hardship waiver resolution. This is asking for the governance structure to work with National SAC and the membership, leverage the resources in the national office to define a more specific and maybe more suitable hardship waiver process for mental health issues and mental health concerns. And so President's Council supported this as well. But this is a resolution that essentially says, here's a process we need to take a look at and potentially change. And so for my last slide, we've already talked about, we've had a couple proposals that are directly in competition with each other. Playing season proposals from both the membership side and the governance side, as well as President's and Management Council composition from both the membership side and the governance side. This is the first time we've had this type of competing proposals since about 2004. And the governance structure took a look at this, and Management Council and President's Council specifically, and said, we need to make this process understandable for the membership at convention. We need to make this process such that the membership can vote on the proposals they want to, and we have open dialogue on these proposals. So and our current parliamentary procedures don't fully allow for that. And so they've proposed and sponsored 2 resolutions that would essentially establish a little bit of a different process for these two subject matters at the convention. And what it would say, and these are resolutions that would have to be approved by you all at the convention first, to say, let's take these 2 playing season proposals, let's discuss the good and the bad, the merits of these proposals, and then we're going to have a vote on which one we should vote on first. And essentially, which one do you all prefer? Whichever one is voted on first, then that is voted against the current rule. If it's adopted, then that becomes the new rule, and the other one is rendered moot. If it's not, then you see the second proposal. And we do that for both of these. And again, we will have a lot more materials coming out on this process, a bit more detail. Talk about this again in December as well. But really the purpose behind this from the councils was to not have their hands tied somewhat with the parliamentary procedures currently in existence that wouldn't allow the proposals to be discussed together. And so that's what they're putting forward. We'll have a little bit different process. We're going to vote on these resolutions during the Friday Issues Forum. So we're at least aware of the process going into Saturday. But again, I stress the educational materials and some of the follow-up webinars that will be discussing these in much more detail.